and we'll finish. Last time we listened to the section about the Rockefeller commissions. I might not quite land on exactly the starting point for the next one, so it might take me a second to get there.
Hi, I'm Robert Krulwich. Radiolab is supposed.
No, we're done. No, we're done.
People that they encountered, a lot of them, they just don't use shoes. Most of them said,
One, they crawl a ski. The South.
there are all of these with the book on parasites.
The book is called
Okay.
Parasitic Diseases.
All right, so that's them finishing off and giving credit to the guy that they interviewed there. So we're going to start up again. The second half is a story about a guy named Jasper Lawrence, who has a different take on hookworms. So.
You know it very well. It's soon to be a major motion picture, but now it's fourth edition.
In its fourth edition.
And while we're on the subject of hookworms and the glorious campaign to deworm America, because this has been a very carefully crafted and intentionally fair program, you have heard the case against hookworms. Now let's turn the coin and say something nice about hookworms. And to begin that discussion, let's go to our reporter, Patrick Walters. So, Pat, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Robert.
So tell us a little bit about this fellow. What's his name exactly?
His name is Jasper Lawrence.
That's right, Jasper Lawrence.
So where's he from?
He actually grew up in England. He grew up in this little farm in the southwest corner of England. And it's important to know, I think, before hearing any part of his story, that Jasper has had allergies for pretty much his whole life.
On really bad days, my eyes would swell up so much from pollen or airborne allergens that they would feel like they were swelling shut. I could feel my eyes squeaking in my sockets. It was an enormously uncomfortable feeling.
But it was nothing debilitating.
They were just allergies.
So, he just, like most other people with allergies, just learned to deal with it.
You live with it.
But
What changed for me in my late 20s, early 30s was my asthma. And at that time, I was living in Santa Cruz. I was relatively recently married. We had 3 cats that had been grandfathered in with the relationship. And I started a landscaping business. I really didn't want to work for someone else.
I think someone with allergies starting a landscaping business, that seems kind of unexpected.
Stupid is actually the word for it. And within 6 months or a year,
He starts to notice.
this really weird barking cough.
Was there anything particular that brought this on?
No, it was just sitting and breathing.
Okay.
Cats certainly didn't help.
Right.
And during that period, my asthma got much worse very, very quickly. By the time it was 1996, 1997, I was seeing specialists, having skin allergen tests and cycling through emergency inhalers, trying Singulair and all these other drugs that were coming on the market. I was being hospitalized at least a couple of times a year. I mean, I looked terrible. I had dark eyes and pale, waxy skin. I had that allergic look. It was a really bad time.
And he decides in the summer of 2004 to take a vacation. He made this visit to England.
Yeah, I took my 2 daughters back to see my aunt who had raised me. Very early in the visit, I was sitting at her kitchen table, and she asked me if I'd seen a BBC documentary about parasites and their connection with things like asthma and allergies and multiple sclerosis. And of course I hadn't, but I went upstairs and got on the internet after lunch, and I stayed on the internet until perhaps 2 in the morning. I didn't stop.
He's reading and reading and
The work of all these researchers.
one study after the next.
Japan, epidemiological studies in Africa, animal models of multiple sclerosis. This enormous weight of evidence.
That in the developing world, people don't really have asthma or allergies. And what he discovers is that behind all of this, to his shock, is hookworms.
Hookworm?
Yeah, hookworms.
Yeah, I learned that asthma was 50% less likely in someone who had a hookworm infection.
So this sort of just hits you.
Oh yeah.
What did you think when you read that?
Oh, I immediately was determined to obtain hookworm. Immediately. I couldn't wait.
So hookworms are these very tiny worms the size of a little hair. But if you take a microscope and you zoom way in, they have this big circular mouth brimming full of pointy teeth. Very scary to look at. They have these toothy mouths so that they can burrow up through your feet, ride through your blood, and eventually end up in your gut and start chewing on the inside of your intestines.
This guy wants hookworms in his intestines?
Absolutely. And so you just Google it?
Yeah, hookworms for sale. I mean, someone's got to be selling them.
But
Nothing. I contacted every laboratory supply company in the world and parasitology research centers, and they all said the same thing. No, various flavors of no. And so I came to the conclusion that I was going to have to go to the tropics.
So fast forward a little. Jasper is in Cameroon along the coast.
Quite literally and figuratively, the armpit of Africa.
He's 200 miles north of the equator. It's extremely hot. He finds a guy to drive him around. And so he and his driver would go to a village,
You get out of the car.
walk up to these villagers, and ask them if they could see the latrine.
Just an open area of ground, usually with bushes so people can have a little bit of privacy. And I would go over to the area, remove my shoes, and start walking. The first time I did that, I almost couldn't do it. It must have been 110 degrees that day, 100% humidity. And the stench and the noise from the insects, it was so repulsive and so disgusting.
How many villages or latrines do you think you visited?
Between 30 and 40.
Jasper spent 2 weeks there walking around in village latrines, and then he flew home.
I got back from Africa in early February. So I was looking at allergy season coming up. And the day I realized that I no longer had allergies, it was such a good day. I got into my car and I started driving, and I had the window down. I felt the breeze blowing across my face. In the past, what that meant was that very quickly my eyes would be itching uncontrollably, snot and phlegm was going to be pouring out of every orifice in my face. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I just started screaming in the car. I was so happy. And I haven't had an asthma attack since I went to Africa. I no longer have allergies. The vast majority of the benefit that I've experienced has come from hookworm.
What is the hookworm doing? Do you know?
Well, so the immune system that we learn about in elementary school is all about like these attack cells that go after foreign invaders and destroy them.
Right.
And that's a big, important part of the immune system. But if the immune system were allowed to attack and destroy things unchecked, it could kill you. And there are lots of diseases where the primary symptoms are caused by the immune system attacking the body that it's really designed to protect. Allergies and asthma are just two of these. Some of the more serious ones are like type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, in which the immune system actually starts attacking the inside of the intestines. There are like 80 of these diseases.
80.
And so what scientists have found in lots and lots of mouse studies, and in some human studies to this point too, is that once the hookworms get inside the gut and the immune system actually starts attacking, somehow hookworms actually stimulate these cells, which just quiet things down and tell the attack cells to stop attacking.
So these are like lullaby cells?
Exactly. What lots and lots of scientists think, Joel Weinstock,
Tufts Medical Center,
and dozens of others, is that over
thousands and thousands of years,
hookworms almost developed in tandem with the human immune system.
coevolution. Parasites living within your body, your immune system changes.
So you got to a point where the hookworms could survive safely.
The worm gets a home, there's food coming down the food pipe, and in return,
The human immune system gains some kind of
some form of
positive regulatory
advantage.
So that if you had this glitch where your immune system started attacking your own body, the presence of the hookworms would keep things
Controlled. That's the gift. You do something for the worm does something for you.
So then, by that logic, what we in the West, in the richer countries, have done stupidly is we have cleaned ourselves up too much, and we don't have enough wormies in us.
Yeah, this is called
They call it the hygiene hypothesis.
The hygiene hypothesis, that we are not dirty enough.
too clean.
We function like rainforests. We're ecosystems, and we've entirely eliminated a class of organism that co-evolved with us and our genetic predecessors for millions of years.
Now, I don't want to leave the impression that hygiene is bad for you. People can't go back to living in filth, kids playing in sewage by the riverbank, but in improving our hygiene, we are also excluding organisms that may be important for making us well.
So then what does Jasper do about all this?
He decides to start a business selling hookworm to people.
What?
You can call him up and he will literally FedEx a dose of hookworms to your door.
How?
Sorry to break in for a second. Pat,
Hi, Jad.
where does he get the hookworm from?
This is weird. Jasper gets the hookworm from himself. Could you describe how you go about getting hookworm from your stool into one of your patients?
Well, it's a very easy organism to work with. It gets up and it walks out of it. So it doesn't take an enormous amount of work to separate it from the feces. And then having done that, I repeatedly wash them in solutions of antibiotics to make sure that anything that could live on them is killed. People contact us, we'll have them complete a questionnaire, submit a recent blood test, then we'll ship them a dose and all the materials and equipment and the instructions necessary to infect themselves.
For instance, is this a safe thing to do?
Jasper,
Yes.
Jasper has done tons and tons of research, but he's not a doctor.
Right.
The treatment is not approved by the FDA.
That's what I wonder. Is there any serious sort of double-blind study trying to figure out whether some safe delivery of hookworm might make sense?
Yes, and so one of the guys who was sort of a pioneer in this hookworm research is David Pritchard,
I'm Professor David Pritchard
immunologist and parasitologist.
at the University of Nottingham, where I study parasites and the wound healing properties of maggots. So we've now got 2 safety trials under our belts, but we've yet to conduct the trials to show that therapeutic benefit results from infection with worms.
So Pritchard infected himself pretty much just to make sure that it was safe.
What we did was 10 of us in the lab took worms at different doses. We were either given 10, 25, 50 or 100 worms, and then we had to report on the symptoms. And on the back of that study, we determined that 10 worms were tolerated.
But Pritchard, when he did this proof of safety study, actually gave himself 50 hookworms,
Oh,
which put him out of commission for a while.
Well, I felt pretty bad. I mean, pain in the gut, really. You could feel them because they are biting on your tissues.
I mean, if you have too many hookworms, they can cause things like diarrhea. And the most serious side effect, and the side effect that makes them sort of a public health enemy, is that they can give you anemia.
So if you have too many, you lose quite a bit of blood to these parasites.
Well, if you take too many hookworm, which you're not going to if you come to us, the worst thing you're going to get is anemia. But it's not like you wake up one morning and you're drained of blood. It's very slow to develop, and it's very easy to deal with.
Jasper's kind of just gone for it. It's a very sort of like cowboy move.
To the scientific community, I think they believe that I'm premature
It's not FDA approved.
in offering this to the public.
You don't know what it is. You don't know its purity. It's not safe.
But I've talked to several clients who had really severe allergies and asthma. They say they've just achieved these great results. And Jasper also says he's seen success with a few multiple sclerosis patients and several Crohn's disease patients too. Like, how many people do you think that you have infected?
It's about 85 right now.
How is business? Is it everything that?
Business is adequate, but I honestly don't know why I don't wake up in the morning with my front garden 20 deep with people with ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, allergies. I just don't know why I'm not completely buried.
The way he sees it, people are scared.
Well, they're the people who are coming from a point of view of what they learned in kindergarten about clean drinking water and sewers. To them, worms and parasites are so repulsive that there's nothing good to be said about them. But I can make you better. It's simple, it's cheap. I mean, for God's sake, these organisms fall out my rear end every day, 500,000 at a time. The raw material is human excrement, for God's sake. All people have to do is open their minds.
Okay, so that's pretty much the end of it. Anybody in here have allergies? How bad are your allergies? Anything like what he's describing?
Well, I don't get that, but on certain days it can be a little bit.
Anybody interested in going and getting a hookworm infection?
Thinking about it.
So I've been playing this podcast for my classes for quite a while. I think it originally aired in 2008, and I've been playing it for at least 5 or 6 years worth of teaching there. When I first started out, I thought it was an interesting story, but I just wanted to run it past somebody to see if I was just completely off my rocker playing it for my students. And I asked Professor Machazek about it. His specialty is in immunology and microbiology, so this is sort of right up his alley. And he said, "Oh yeah, this is a thing. The hygiene hypothesis is a real valid hypothesis, and it's something to consider. You know, goes a little bit beyond the basic understanding of immunity, which is mostly the attack cell kind of thing that they mentioned in the middle there." So I like this just to get students thinking about our immune system and our relationship to the environment around us. As I've been playing it, a couple of things have kind of added to the idea of what's going on and sort of reinforced why I really like having this as part of the class. One thing is, a few years ago now, one of my students came up after class, after I played this, and said, "You know, I grew up in Mexico City, and when I was 19, I went to college and came up to the States, went to college in DC, I think Georgetown or something like that. When she was a freshman in college, she was convinced that the other women in her dorm were pulling her leg as the foreigner coming to the States for the first time, to say that one of the women in her dorm had such bad allergies that she couldn't, go to class or anything. It was as bad as having a major illness. And she just couldn't believe that was true. She thought they were making fun of her. She had never, in her 19 years living in Mexico City, ever met anybody with allergies. Okay. And I was actually just saying this to my night class on Tuesday, and one of my students in there is originally from Ghana, and he said, "Yeah, I never knew anybody with allergies either." He moved to the States, married, had a child. Early on, his child started to exhibit signs of, he had a great way of putting it. I can't quite remember how he said it. He didn't say like pre-allergies or something like that, but problems but processing his environment. I can't remember. The way he said it was perfect. And so what he did is he had his child go to Ghana for 6 months to stay with relatives. And since coming back, the child has shown no evidence of the hint of allergies or anything like that. So it does sort of suggest in Western, highly developed, very hygienic culture that maybe what we're seeing of just out of control allergies and autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, et cetera, might be because we're too hygienic. Another thing that happened that kind of reinforced this, which actually just happened recently, I don't quite remember what context it was in, but I came across reference to the hygiene hypothesis. And I think it was Johns Hopkins University, and it might have been just at the end of last year, like December 2015 or something like that, just put out a statement or an article or published a paper, I don't remember exactly what it was, but stating that the hygiene hypothesis is a much stronger hypothesis than any evidence before had really supported it. It really does seem to be true that it is being a little overly hygienic is leading to a lot of problems. I mean, kids can't bring peanut butter to school. Okay, when I was a kid, that was never an issue. There was peanut butter, but now it's gotten to the point where it can be such a big problem for maybe one or two people that being exposed to even just the slightest hint of any peanut product can be basically deadly, and so that has to just be completely removed. And it's just, how did that kind of change happen? My sister-in-law and her husband have two children, and it was kind of, I don't know, a little bit pitiable when their oldest daughter said, "Oh, I'm so excited, I get to start eating nuts." And it was like her 4th or 5th birthday, I don't remember which. But they would not let her touch nuts until a certain point. Now, partly that's because the father, my sister-in-law's husband, has really bad allergies to shellfish, and just learned over the holidays here, coconut too, which I'd never heard of before. But so he already has really bad allergies. And so they were concerned about that there might be some genetic predisposition of their children. So they were very serious about that. But yeah, it was when the daughter was like so excited that she was going to finally be able to start eating nuts because she'd reached whatever age they had determined it was safe to do. It was a little bittersweet just to hear a kid sort of thinking like that. I also just came across or read a reference to a study that shows that there's some data that was recently released that exposure to peanut products early on in life, and I don't quite remember exactly what they said, maybe the first year of life or something like that, reduces the likelihood of peanut allergies significantly, like 80% or something like that. And also, even if there's early exposure to peanut products and then no exposure for a long time after that, and years after that, that's the still confers that sort of protection against peanut allergies, which suggests that if children are exposed to peanuts early, they can develop a tolerance for them or not develop allergies to them. And then if they're in an environment where peanut products aren't allowed, they're not going to suddenly develop a sensitivity to it, that their body should already be sort of preserved for that. Now, let me just say that what I just said was a very cursory reading of something, so don't go out there and start exposing children to peanut products and say, well, Dr. So said it'd be fine. If you're interested in that, please do a little research to find out. But apparently there's been some recent breakthroughs data that stop peanut allergies.
Yeah, I heard you say something about Ghana. I'm also from Ghana. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, the first time I came here, I didn't know anything about allergies. Right. So it's just like, but I also think we have the allergies, but we don't know what it is. If, like my family, for instance, we don't eat pork. Mm-hmm. Like my sister will eat pork and she'll get some rashes. But for me and my brother, we don't get nothing. So I think it's there, but we don't actually classify it as like allergies.
Right. I think that's a very good point that you're making. I think I'm not trying to say that the hygiene hypothesis is telling us that we wouldn't have allergies if we let the kids play in the dirt as a young kid or something like that. But rather, the really extreme allergic reactions we see, like Jasper Lawrence basically has hay fever, where he shuts down. He said that he has to be hospitalized 1 or 2 times a year because of it. That very extreme kind of reaction, that kind of thing, or these peanut allergies that are becoming more prevalent, or that sort of thing. Maybe that's because of what the hygiene hypothesis is getting at. But allergies are there. It is possible for the immune system to be sensitized to things that aren't really pathogenic. So it's not a stretch. And you might not call them allergies, and that just might be kind of a language issue. Not that you don't have a word for allergies or whatever, but they're just not talked about in that same sense. But yeah, people have been getting rashes all along. I mean, when I was a kid, I had an allergic reaction to citrus. If I ate an orange or something like that, I get a rash around my lips, just some sort of dermatitis kind of thing. And those kinds of things I'm not saying are because of the hygiene. Heck, I played in the dirt plenty when I was a kid. But the sort of really extreme change we're seeing for allergies might be something. And like the student I had from Mexico City and my other student from Ghana and you just don't have the same kind of experience with allergies that we see around here. And it's probably just, I mean, in the United States, there's a company that is selling you products based on the idea that it can kill 99.99% of the germs on your countertops or whatever. And they have those commercials like there's one where a guy's like cleaning a fish on the kitchen counter, and another one where like he's changing the baby's diaper or something like that on the kitchen counter or whatever. And of course, it's always the husband that's doing something stupid on the kitchen counter. And so it's like, oh, if your husband's so stupid to do this on the kitchen counter, then you have to buy Lysol so that your life is okay. Which is, just marketing stuff, and it's really leading to this idea that people need to be, completely hygienic and everything has to be great. There are some very good uses to hand sanitizer, especially in flu season or something like that. But when somebody gets to the point where they have germ phobia, that they're not going to touch anything for fear of getting exposed to something, I'm trying to think. It was really annoying. My wife said something to me. Where was it? We had to go somewhere with our son, and she texted me saying, "Don't touch any but." Oh, that's right. She had a doctor's appointment, and I was waiting out in the hallway waiting out in the car with our son. And then he started getting really cranky, and he needed a diaper change. And I knew they had diaper changing stations in the doctor's office, waiting room bathrooms. So I was going to come in, and as I'm coming in, she texted me. I texted her saying, "I'm coming in to change his diaper." And so she texted back, which I didn't see until I got up there, but she said, "Don't touch any buttons," or something like that. So she wanted me to hit the elevator button with my elbow. I was like, "You're being crazy." But yeah, that's, I probably shouldn't have recorded that. So I'll make sure my wife doesn't listen to my recordings. But anyways, yeah, so there is a pervasive attitude, especially here in America, where we're seemingly over hygienic. Related to that, not because of the immune system stuff, but there's also antibiotic resistant pathogens that we are also having a problem with. And that's because medicine, doctors overprescribe antibiotics to help fight off infections. Because again, you have any little infection, you want to get rid of it because it's disgusting that you have something like that in your body, right? So, let's see. I want to go into the presentation material and show you some stuff. Okay. I just muted it because I don't want it to play my voiceover on top of things, but so I want to start just to introduce. I didn't talk about any of this stuff before the. Oh wait, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but since I haven't opened up this version, let me pull this up. I showed you. Did I show you a presentation thing that had innate and adaptive immunity, but it was like from another book? Yeah, okay. So when I was showing you that, I said I have my version. Since I happen to have pulled this up, I'll go ahead and point this out. Just that for innate and adaptive immunity, I have passive and active for both of them. What I showed you just had passive and active under adaptive immunity, but then within that, natural and artificial. Just as an aside, I've put natural and artificial in quotation marks for all that, just because those two words really bug me. They get thrown around and people feel differently about whether things are artificial or natural. What those really mean, and I want to sort of mention this because it kind of goes with the little rant I had about Lysol a second ago. What that really means is very vague, and it's used as a marketing term for the most part, because natural is good and artificial is bad. The active adaptive immunity, the naturally occurring or naturally acquired type, is your immune system's ability to learn about infection, what's infected you, and fight off that sort of thing. The artificial version is vaccination. So I talked about that, right? And I mentioned chickenpox. Right? Okay. So which is better, to actually get the chickenpox and fight them off, or to get a vaccine against chickenpox and never have to deal with it as a disease? Yeah. So, but if we just go with natural versus artificial, natural is always thought of as being better, or something like that. So that's why I've put quotes around those words. I just don't. I want to get away from the connotations that have built up around them a little bit. Okay, so I just wanted, since I was here, I wanted to point that out. But so now we're going to get into actually looking at the immune system. So there are two aspects to it. I already introduced that idea the first time we looked at what that last figure was about. The innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what innate immunity is, and then we're going to look at what adaptive immunity is. I don't think I quite have enough time in the rest of today to cover, maybe I do, innate immunity. So hopefully I'll be able to wrap this up in 40-ish minutes. And then we'll do adaptive immunity starting next week. That might take more than one class period of coverage. So it might go into next Thursday. And then we'll start with the respiratory system after that, which might be Thursday, or we might not even get around to that till the week after. Oh, that's right. So innate immunity, I think I defined it this way a little bit before, can also be referred to as non-specific immunity. It's what you're born with, and it's what can react to things that are potentially making you sick right from the get-go. And for our purposes right now, to call it not specific means that it doesn't use antibodies. You've been introduced to what antibodies are because we talked about them already in the context of blood, because they belong to the class of molecules we call plasma proteins. We're going to talk much more about what antibodies are when we get to the adaptive immune system, but they are not required for innate immunity. As far as the passive versus active components of adaptive immunity, which I didn't really talk about before, because when I first showed you that figure, I wasn't showing you the version that I had active and passive under innate, but in the online presentation, which we're actually looking at right now, it does explain that. Passive, things that don't require energy, as far as innate immunity is concerned, are the barriers of your skin. And actually, to say doesn't require energy is a little bit of an oversimplification, but the idea is that your skin or the mucosal membranes lining your digestive, respiratory, reproductive, or urinary tracts, they are there. They're a structure that's part of those systems, and they're not going to not be there. But then they do use energy in the fact that mucous membranes secrete mucus, or your skin secretes sweat and oil and that sort of thing. But that's they're just part of you. They're there, and they are a barrier to keep things out of your body. Now, when you think of what's inside or outside of your body, you probably just think of your skin as being the limit. So everything beyond your skin is outside your body, and everything inside your skin is in your body. From an immunological point of view, that's not exactly true, which is why mucosal membranes are listed here. Mucosal membranes line these 4 different tracts, which are open to the outside world. So right now I'm holding this pen in my hand, and I'm holding it, sort of as far away from my body as I can. Definitely outside of my body. But as far as an immunological definition is considered, it's still outside of my body. Right? The fact that it's in my mouth, which is making it hard for me to talk, doesn't mean that it's suddenly inside my body. From an immunological point of view, as long as it hasn't crossed the mucous membrane of my oral cavity, it's effectively outside of my body. If I were to swallow this and it went down my esophagus and into my stomach and eventually get to my intestines, as long as it stays inside the digestive tract, it's still immunologically outside of my body. That concept actually has already been sort of implied in the terms endocrine versus exocrine. Exocrine secretions, by definition, secretions outside of your body, include secretions across these mucous membranes. So your digestive juices, like from your pancreas into your small intestine, are exocrine secretions because their target, the lumen of the small intestine, is outside of your body in the same sense. Okay. Now, these barriers do produce things, whether it's antimicrobial secretions like enzymes that can break down bacterial walls, or acidic secretions like your skin secretes a slightly acidic solution onto its surface, which can inhibit bacterial growth, in the sense that the bacteria that want to get into our body and make us sick are looking to live in a pH of about 7.35. Our skin has a pH of about 6.5, which is acidic compared to our physiological pH inside of our body. That helps to inhibit some bacteria from getting into our body, just because they can't exist on our skin waiting for an opportunity to get through a wound or something like that. But then there are bacteria that have adapted to be able to live on our skin, and given the chance, are fine making the transition from the slightly acidic pH of our skin to the more neutral pH inside of our body. But it does help to limit the amount of bacteria that is a potential threat. Now, the rest of what's here, inflammation, cells, complement, and interferon, represent what I originally classified as the active component of innate immunity, in that the cells and the tissues that are responsible for everything else expend quite a bit of energy to perform their functions that we see here. Okay. Now, to talk about inflammation to begin with, I want to use this figure. This is sort of a classical figure to demonstrate that. Classical in the sense that it looks like classical Greek architecture or something like that, or but also it's sort of the picture that's always used to explain it in your basic introduction to physiology class. At least I'm familiar with it mostly because the medical school where I was getting my graduate degree, one of my roommates back then was a medical student, and so I first was introduced to this figure when he was taking physiology. I saw this. And so my dad, who's a physician, at the time I asked him about this figure because oddly enough, my dad and I, when I was a kid, actually had several conversations about inflammation. So I asked him about this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that picture from when I was in medical school." So it's classical in the sense that it's been used in medical school training for a long time. It's a nice little way of kind of illustrating the 5 main aspects to inflammation. Now, inflammation as a word, its root is essentially flame, which suggests burning or heat. But really what inflammation is it's increased perfusion to tissue and increased permeability of blood vessels. So when there's disease or damage in a particular tissue, there will be signals that cause the blood vessels to dilate so that more blood flows to that tissue, and for the blood vessel wall to be leakier or more permeable to things, so that components for your immune system can get out of the bloodstream and into the tissue to do their job. So the center of this picture is swelling, which is essentially that, increased perfusion and permeability. If more blood flows to tissue and more stuff can leak out of the blood vessels, then there's going to be an accumulation of fluid in that tissue, and that's swelling. It's kind of the root of this. Moving to my side of the picture, next to swelling is redness, and increased perfusion, increased blood flow to a tissue, automatically means that it's going to turn red. Now the picture there has this guy embarrassed because his toga's fallen off or whatever, but they're using this because embarrassment, where your face gets red, is because part of the emotional response to that is dilation of blood vessels in your face. So it's not the inflammatory response, but it is increased perfusion to that particular tissue that we see there. Heat kind of goes right along with that increased perfusion also. Our body temperature is really based on the temperature of our blood. And so if you have more blood going to a particular tissue, that tissue is going to necessarily be warmer than other tissues. However, the heat thing also can be defined chemically. Sometimes there are tissues that increase their heat because of chemical signals that come with the inflammatory response. There's a class of chemicals called pyrogens. I don't remember if I introduced that word when I was talking about whatever gen type words, but pyrogens generate heat. Pyro, as in pyromaniac, basically means fire. And so there are chemicals that will increase heat production in tissue when that's necessary. The bacteria that can potentially infect us, or viruses that might cause infection, are very sensitive to heat. They're optimized for living in or existing in 37 degrees Celsius, which is our body temperature. If we raise body temperature locally or systemically, that can inhibit the growth or survival of bacteria, and it can increase the denaturation of proteins. Okay. Question? Okay. If you expose a protein to heat, that will break apart the hydrogen bonds that keeps its three-dimensional shape. So if you heat up a bacterium or a virus, then you'll denature its proteins, and it'll hopefully destroy the pathogen. Unfortunately, high heat can also do that same thing to your cells. We have a little bit of tolerance for heat. Usually we can tolerate fevers up to about 104 degrees Celsius, which is, I want to say 40 degrees, no, I said that wrong, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, which I believe is about 40 degrees Celsius. We can't tolerate a really high fever like that for very long, but we do have actual special proteins in our body that help to stabilize other proteins under high heat conditions, which bacteria don't necessarily have, or pathogens in general don't necessarily have. A lot of sources will separate out local changes in heat in a tissue for the inflammatory response from fever. But as far as I'm concerned at this point, they're basically the same thing. The only difference is one's local, the inflammatory response is local, and fever is systemic. But when you're to the point where you have a systemic fever, you're probably also going to have systemic inflammation. Okay? You're going to be achy and those sorts of things, and that's mostly because of swelling of tissues all throughout your body. On the other side of the picture, moving from swelling over, pain, which could be that systemic achiness I just suggested, is really a signal to limit your behavior. Pain is not a very useful signal in telling your body to repair itself. It's not like your body says, oh, my finger hurts, I better heal the cut that I just had on my finger. Instead, the pain is a conscious level signal. If you cut your finger and your finger hurts, then you're going to wrap it in a bandage or make sure that you don't do further damage to that. A couple of weeks ago, I hurt my thumb, unfortunately on my right hand, and pretty much everything I did with my right hand, like reaching into the washing machine to pull the clothes out to put in the dryer, every time I used my right hand, it was just this shooting pain. And I got to the point where I stopped, tried to stop using my right hand to that extent. So I reach into the washing machine with my left hand to get the clothes out or whatever. And after a while, that change in my behavior made it possible for my thumb to heal after I damaged it. That's really what pain's about. Now, I mentioned kind of the systemic achiness that comes with a fever or something like that. And when you feel like that, all you want to do is you want to crawl in bed and do nothing, okay? Which is an alteration of your behavior. So that level of achiness that goes with a systemic fever is still a signal to get you to change your behavior. And it then, because of that change in behavior, allows for the particular tissue or your body as a whole to have time and resources to help heal itself. And then at the end there, we have loss of function. The picture is a little bit extreme. You know, things are falling apart and he's lost his hands. But the idea of loss of function is just with inflammation, tissue isn't going to be able to do its primary job as well as it used to. Any condition that you've heard about that the name of it ends in itis is inflammatory. So pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. Arthritis is inflammation of the joints. Some of those are caused by other things and other problems that are a little bit beyond what I'm talking about here, but just inflammation in general will make function a little bit, will cause loss of function in those areas. For example, with arthritis, when your joints are swollen, it's harder to move those joints. You lose a little bit of function there. Now, with arthritis, that's actually not a great example for the use of loss of function. So if part of your body that's damaged or diseased loses function, then it can put more energy into trying to heal. With arthritis, arthritis is either just degradation of the tissue overall, wear and tear with age, or there is actually an autoimmune disease called rheumatoid arthritis. And loss of function of your joints, not being able to bend them as much, isn't really going to help them heal, because at that point, that kind of arthritis needs a different kind of intervention for healing. So, but pancreatitis, when your pancreas can't do things quite as well, it also leaves the pancreas the resources to try to heal itself, if it can, or something like that. So that's, again, the classical way of kind of thinking about what inflammation is. I mentioned that my dad, who's a physician, when I was a kid, we actually had several discussions about inflammation. My dad was not the most exciting father to have in the world. I learned the cranial nerves when I was about 13. But I remember having a couple of discussions with him because he could never remember all 5 of these things from medical school. And it was weird because it was, each time we talked about it, it wasn't the same 4 things that he could remember. It's like sometimes he would forget loss of function, and sometimes he'd forget maybe it was heat or something like that. So if he could put together all of his memories at once, he'd remember all 5 of them. But on a given day, he usually can only come up with 4 of them. But so that's life in my house when I was a kid. So now this is the picture that the book uses to describe inflammation. And all this is showing, instead of talking about the 5 different aspects of inflammation, just shows what causes inflammation. So here we have a wound. Now I want to point out, so that you're aware of it in this picture, this curvy line here represents the basement membrane of the epidermis. So the wound that we see here is going all the way down into the dermis. I might have made it go a little bit further just to really accentuate that it's getting into the dermis. But the idea here is this is a significant wound to the skin, as opposed to a paper cut or something like that. Because this is now broken through the barrier of the epidermis. If you don't break all the way through the epidermis, then you're not really going to see infection, which can lead to inflammation. But when tissue is destroyed, it's going to start releasing some chemicals, which aren't actually mentioned here. And it'll also cause mast cells, which are what these 2 cells here are supposed to be, to release histamine. And the chemicals released by damaged tissue and histamine released by mast cells will start or initiate the inflammatory response. And so the histamine there we're seeing is going over here and affecting the blood vessel that's nearby. I kind of wish this picture were a little bit more evocative, maybe. So that in the second picture, the blood vessel were wider to say that it's dilated. And also, they just have a solid red wall to the blood vessel. If they actually drew in that there were squamous cells, thinking of that, in the second picture, they could show that the cellular clefts between them are a little looser so that things can get out. Then we have a couple of white blood cells in the front. And white blood cells will be able to leave the bloodstream and get into the surrounding tissue and help fight off infection. These cells are called phagocytes, which we'll talk about in a second. And what they do is they eat, in this case, it's eating a microbe, bacteria or something like that, but they can also eat or gobble up the debris of that damaged tissue or something like that. I think this picture makes kind of a poor choice. In the second frame, they draw this kind of oil spill looking red thing that goes all the way out to the edge. That's not what redness is, okay? There's not something in blood that's just like red food coloring that can spill out. What makes blood red is the oxygen that's being carried by red blood cells. And they have red blood cells drawn in here. The redness that they've drawn in this picture is inaccurate because you wouldn't have red blood cells spilling out into the tissue, making the tissue red. It's really, when you look at the tissue with the naked eye, because there's more blood flowing through that tissue because of the dilated blood vessels, then it'll look red to the naked eye. But at a cellular level, you won't see this oil spill kind of red going into the tissue. That's a little bit inaccurate way to produce that. Now down here in the second part of this, they do mention swelling, redness, heat in terms of the word warm, and painful. They leave out any reference to loss of function, and that's mostly because in this picture, there's not a function specifically to mention other than the protective function of the skin, which has been interrupted because of the wound. But that doesn't quite go with what we were talking about a second ago. But this is the way that the book kind of introduces the inflammatory response. So in that picture, let me see if I can get this. I can't quite get it all onto the page. In that picture, they pointed out phagocytes. Phago means to eat, and cyte means cell. So the word can be translated as a cell that eats. You could also, I suppose, translate it as cell eater, but that's not entirely appropriate because they don't just eat cells. By eating, I mean ingesting, which we kind of see in the scanning electron micrograph. The gray thing is a white blood cell, and the green thing, which has been artificially colored for this, scanning electron micrographs are always black and white, but they're colored in green so you can see it. That's some sort of bacterium that's being engulfed by the white blood cell and pulled inside. That's what I mean by eating. It ingests them. I was trying to fit up here at the top, in parentheses, it says neutrophils and macrophages. Phagocyte is just a general term for a cell that eats things, that clears away debris and pathogens. The two types of white blood cells that primarily do that are neutrophils and macrophages. Now, macrophage has in its name phage, like phagocyte. And if phagocyte means a cell that eats, then macrophage means big eater or something like that. A neutrophil means something completely different, doesn't refer to this function of these cells at all, but those two types of white blood cells are primarily the ones that are phagocytes. There are 5 types of white blood cells. Okay. Neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. I hesitated for a second there because I got to remember which order to put them in. That was the never let monkeys eat bananas order. Okay. Neutrophils are the most common type of white blood cell. They make up almost 2/3 of the white blood cells in your system. Lymphocytes are the next most common, and they make up about 1/4 to 1/5 of the white blood cells in your system. Lymphocytes are not phagocytes. Okay. So we got neutrophils, we're skipping lymphocytes. And then the next type is a monocyte. Monocytes are what become macrophages. Okay. When monocytes are fully activated and go out to do their thing, they're macrophages. But until they get activated, they're monocytes. And they make up a little less than 10% of the white blood cells in your system. Those 3, neutrophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes, make up 95 or more % of the white blood cells in your system. Lymphocytes do not fall in this category, so that leaves us with neutrophils and monocytes, which become macrophages, are responsible for this. So aside from lymphocytes, the vast majority of white blood cells in your system can do this, which is to gobble up things. For the sake of the, for the sake of the presentation, I took the picture that I showed you a second ago, just about inflammation, which had these 2 frames, but they were one above the other. I just cut the picture in half and put them side by side to fit on the screen a little bit better. To introduce the idea of phagocyte recruitment. So these are white blood cells in your system, but when something happens, they're called upon to do this. And so the damaged tissue releases some signals or when tissue becomes infected by something. It releases chemicals that will help lead to inflammation and will recruit or call upon phagocytes to come do their job. Histamine released from mast cells, which we just met as being a cause of inflammation, also will recruit phagocytes to a site where histamine is being released. The presence of pathogens in a tissue will stimulate the attraction or recruitment of phagocytes to that tissue, because being foreign bodies in your system don't look like cells that are supposed to be in your body. So they are inherently a signal for your immune system to come find and fight off an infection. And then other white blood cells. by which I could kind of mean lymphocytes as other white blood cells besides neutrophils and monocytes, but also just in general, a single white blood cell, when it gets here, is going to release chemical signals to attract more white blood cells to do the job. So damaged tissue itself, mast cells releasing histamine, the pathogens that have caused infection in the first place, and white blood cells that have already been recruited will recruit more white blood cells. So those are all things that cause the recruitment or activation, if you will, of the phagocytes when there's injury or infection to your body. As I'm talking about a lot of this stuff, I'm saying disease or injury and infection. The immune system we usually think of as being about fighting off pathogens and fighting off disease, but also it's there to help when we damage tissue. So when you sprain your ankle, there's no wound, there's no pathogens that have gotten into those tissues to cause disease, but it's damaged tissue. And the inflammatory response is still going to do its job. Phagocytes might be called upon. If you sprain your ankle, you might have torn some muscle or connective tissue. And so phagocytes can show up and help clear away debris from that damaged tissue. So when I usually try to say disease and damage or injury and infection, just to highlight that the system is dealing with more than just pathogens. Now, this is the picture that the book uses to describe how white blood cells go through phagocytosis. Or actually, it's not. It's the only place in the book where they introduce that, but they're actually talking about something else at this point, which includes all of that. What I decided to do was to grab a picture, and this is just from Wikipedia, which has a bunch of free art to use, that illustrates this. So this big light blue thing is a phagocyte. It interacts with a microbe, pathogen, bacteria, whatever you want to call it, which will attach to the surface of the phagocyte through usually some sort of protein receptor in cell membrane. For the sake of this picture, those receptors have been drawn grossly out of scale. They're going to be very, very small relative to the size of the phagocyte or the microbe that's being ingested. But there's a physical connection of what it's ingesting to the surface of the cell. And then the cell reaches out and encloses that thing and pulls it inside the cell in a vacuole or vesicle or whatever you want to call it, that's specifically called the phagosome. So that's what's been ingested into the cell. The phagosome will merge with another organelle in the cell called the lysosome. A lysosome is basically the stomach for an individual cell. Okay? Your stomach has acid in it and digestive enzymes. Lysosomes have acid and digestive enzymes. The pH of the acid in your stomach is very low, in the range of 1 to 3, depending on how actively you're digesting food at a particular time. Lysosomes' pH is more in the range of maybe 5, but still it's acidic. Okay? And then your stomach or lysosomes both contain digestive enzymes, and those digestive enzymes work best at an acidic pH. They're not the exact same enzymes. What's in your stomach and what's in the lysosome are different enzymes, but they do the same basic thing, which is to break down macromolecules. So when the lysosome and the phagosome merge together, that's what we call the phagolysosome. And the acid and digestive enzymes from the lysosome will help to break down whatever the phagocyte has ingested. And we end up having the phagolysosome ends up having the debris that's left over from that digestion process. And we have now killed whatever it was that was ingested. White blood cells that are phagocytic just do this all the time. They hunt down things that aren't supposed to be in your body and gobble them up and break them down. We usually think of it mostly in terms of pathogens like this picture, but also red blood cells that have lived out their 120-day life cycle are going to be ingested and broken down by phagocytes also. Any sort of cellular debris or damaged tissue will be basically cleaned up by all the stuff that's present being removed. Now in this picture, they show the remnants of the destroyed pathogen being released as soluble debris. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, and we're going to get to a point in the adaptive immune system where we come back to this idea and see a little bit more what happens to that debris. But especially for something like a red blood cell that's lived out its 120 days, what gets broken down can be released from the white blood cell and then repurposed or reused or recycled, whatever you want to say. The amino acids that are broken down, the lipids that are broken down, all that stuff can be released from the phagocyte and then reused to make new proteins or new cells somewhere else. With pathogens, it's not always the best idea. Now, if you can digest pathogens down to individual amino acids or something like that, you can reuse those, sure. But sometimes pathogens create toxic molecules. In the sort of escalating arms race of your immune system and pathogens that produce toxic molecules when they're broken down by phagocytes can make it possible for other pathogens to be more successful at infecting you. So it's an advantage in their side of the arms race. And so there are other things that we do with the debris from broken down pathogens than just releasing it back into our body, because that could be a bad thing to have happen. But this is a fairly simplistic picture just to illustrate the idea of what phagocytes do. And the important thing is they ingest things into the phagosome and the lysosome combine, and the phagolysosome destroys, breaks down whatever's been ingested to get rid of it. Yeah.
The interior of the lysosome, more like peroxide or hydrogen peroxide?
That would be the peroxisome. Different thing. Lysosomes, low pH, acidic. Peroxisomes have hydrogen peroxide in them, which help to metabolize other types of things, which might be necessary at the end of this process, but not illustrated here because it's not always the case. But especially with lipids, peroxisomes are going to be around to help handle something that comes from those. So, but yeah. Okay. The other two things of the innate immune system to talk about are complement and interferon. I'm not going to have time to talk about both of these in time we have left. Let me just say a few things generally about them, and then next time we'll come back and look at them in more detail. They represent two chemical pathways. Complement is a series of proteins that interact in a cascade way, kind of like clotting factors. But what complement does is it causes cytolysis of cellular pathogens like bacteria. Lysis means to break apart, so cytolysis is breaking apart a cell or destroying a cellular pathogen. Interferon, there are a few different types of interferon, and you can see in the label for that picture up there, I want to talk specifically about alpha interferon, which is a signal that's used by cells when they're infected by viruses to try to limit the spread of that viral infection. There are other interferons. So as a group, interferons are signaling molecules within the immune reaction. Sometimes they're, like alpha interferon, are released by infected cells. Sometimes they're released by white blood cells, sort of as a hormone signal to regulate the immune reaction. And then there are a couple of other cells that have their own versions of interferons. So with 5 minutes left, I don't want to get into talking about either of these because they require more time to fully explain. So just that quick introduction to the idea that these are chemicals that are used to regulate certain aspects of the immune response. We'll come back to them and talk about what complement and interferon are more specifically next time on Tuesday, and then we'll go into adaptive immunity, which will probably carry us through. Next week, there will not be any lab meetings. Okay, so I was kind of making a joke that my dog has mani-pedi, so I'm canceling Monday lab. Actually, I knew I was going to cancel Monday lab, and so I scheduled the appointment for my dog. But yes, we will not have Monday lab. I will probably not be here until about 11 o'clock on Monday. And then Wednesday, I'm also canceling for you guys just to keep everything on even keel. I will be here Wednesday morning if you have any questions. But otherwise, we'll see everybody again on Tuesday next week to continue our show.